Welcome to Season 2 of the Cultural Cultivators podcast by Belay Creative and Cultivate Labs, where we delve into various aspects of film culture and speak with entrepreneurs, artists, and creators who are shaping and pushing the boundaries of their respective fields. Join us as we cultivate a greater appreciation for the beauty and complexity of the film experience. Follow us on all social media platforms at Belay Creative or on Instagram at cultural.cultivators. Creative and cultivators are both with a K. Today we're honored to have Dr. Robyn Rodriguez with us. Dr. Robyn, as I refer to her, is widely recognized for her influential work as a professor emeritus of Asian American Studies at UC Davis. Beyond her academic achievements, she's a prolific researcher, an in-demand speaker, and a dedicated community organizer. After the tragic loss of her 22-year-old son, Amado Khaya, who was serving indigenous communities in the Philippines, Dr. Robyn made a courageous decision to completely transform her life. She shifted her focus from her 2-decade-long academic career to create something truly impactful. She founded Reimagination Farm and the Reimagination Lab, a pioneering research and educational consultancy. This includes the School of Liberating Education and the Amado Khaya Initiative, both of which embody her commitment to education, community, and collective liberation. In this conversation, Dr. Robyn emphasizes the importance of reframing our relationship to the natural world and her role in helping connect those dots.
We have to think about being in community with the land and each other in a relationship, and that requires a kind of mutuality and responsibility and reciprocity. I'm feeling it in my gut that this is now the thing I need to start to turn some attention to, because I think that's a role I can play to help, if not convening all of us, to help braid and weave together all of the ways that we're imagining and doing a different kind of living, but to at least provide those insights.
Also in this conversation, Dr. Robyn reflects on her journey as an Asian American Studies professor at UC Davis and the founding of Bulosan Center for Philippine X Studies, the influence the pandemic had on her decision to transition out of the institution, and how encyclopedias and a lifetime love of learning informs her methodology today. You can follow Reimagination Farm at reimaginationfarm.org or on Instagram. All right. Well, Dr. Robyn, thank you so much for coming on to Cultural Cultivators. I've been a huge fan of you for some time, I think since the first time we started our ancestor altars in 2022. And also just your work in the community, meeting you at Panaista when I think I was like 6 months pregnant at the time in 2021, and getting to see you talk and inspire the Panais that showed up at that conference was just, it was so empowering. And so full circle, we love full circle moments on this podcast. To have you come on as a guest, we are so honored and grateful for you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you. I've been looking forward to this for a while now. So thank you so much.
So we always start our podcast with this first question, and it's, which ancestors or anyone who has transitioned would you like to call into this space and conversation today?
My dad has been top of mind for a while now. You know, somebody once told me that your body always remembers. And it's just really remembering today, actually, or at least my mind is catching up with my body, maybe, that 10 years ago around this time was when his health went into serious decline. And then we ended up losing him September 12th in 2014. So it's been almost 10 years just next month. So I think maybe that's why I've been missing him a lot. My body has felt it, this sense of longing for his company, his presence, and my mind is finally catching up to recognize, it's because it's been almost 10 years. So I think my dad I call into this space where he's with me. I would also say my mom as well, who we lost more recently, always with me. I have just been thinking a lot about what it means to be the daughter of a nurse. I think it's a joke in our community. So many of us share that experience of being children of nurses. But I had a really dear friend over last night who talked about what it really meant for her to think about herself as part of a nursing lineage. And I'd never really thought about myself in that way, and realized, in fact, that so much of who I am really is as a result of this lineage that I trace to my mother, a lineage of healers. Even though she kind of went in the direction of kind of Western medicine and Western healing, so much of her work in the world that she also carried on from her ancestors was work of healing and transformation. And I think it took some time for me to recognize how much that's shaped me, to think of myself as in the lineage of healers by way of my mom. Always have my son here. It's the hardest, most tender thing still. It's been 4 years earlier this month in August. He's always with me. And also acutely aware of his absence in a physical form, as much as I also know he is constantly present in everything I do. And I would say my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, I definitely feel like so much of my work on the farm, particularly harvesting and preparing, planting, harvesting, and preparing the food that we grow, really just brings her closer to me every day. I'm just so grateful that, my parents, and I know it was hard for her. She came, in middle age, left behind a whole life in the Philippines to come and basically provide childcare for myself and my brother. I know that she didn't always enjoy that. I think there was sometimes some resentment that I understand and empathize with. When you leave behind an entire life and then you're being asked to provide care for your grandchildren in a country where you have no real connections apart from your children and grandchildren, that can be a really challenging thing. But boy, am I so grateful that I had her. Anything I whip up in the kitchen is because of what I learned watching her. And so every time I harvest something on the farm and cook it, I recollect her and our times together in the kitchen, and just, recall just the kind of learning I did in the kitchen, or the kind of teaching she did, which was never like, you put the onions in first, or do you put 2 tablespoons of patis? It was always, by smell, by taste, by sight and touch. And I appreciate that, I think especially because I was formally trained as an academic and had a job as a professor. There are so many ways in which you think about teaching as happening in a very specific way, with a curriculum that happens over a course of time, with key topics, assignments. But so much of what I retained from my Lola didn't come out in that way. We don't have recipes in our family, but we have recipes in our family. And I just appreciate that. And every day we harvest and I cook something and just recollect our time in the kitchen together, and just feel so grateful that she was there as part of my life.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
tough one.
beautiful though. I love this idea of legacy as healers.
And I mean, it's kind of interesting, especially with Hilot, because I do feel like we are seeing more and more people, especially kind of second, third generation, like Filipinx folks in the US, trying to access Hilot and offer Hilot. And I think that's great. And I'm also feeling like one of the things I learned about Hilot through my Lola is that it wasn't a specialized skill of a person. Like, for example, a medical doctor in Western society, is often held up on this pedestal as somebody with a particular kind of knowledge and expertise that only can be accessed by way of them. And he looked, at least the way I understood it and the way it was practiced by my Lola, it wasn't that. It was a generalized knowledge that was shared. And yes, there might be some who were especially gifted practitioners, but it was a knowledge base that was shared across the community. And I think that's important, because for those of us committed to a process of decolonial knowledge and decolonial healing, I think we have to remember that that's part of it. It's not about sort of some individual who holds a very specialized role that is somehow apart and almost above the community, but somebody who's just as much a part of the community as anyone. And it's actually a skill like swimming or, like some of us, we may not all be like Olympic swimmers, right? Or we may not be chefs, but there's these basic skill sets that are important to be passed on. And so anyhow, just because I really feel like there's been a proliferation of a seeking out of Hilot knowledge and practice, and I get a little bit worried that we may unwittingly be replicating certain Western ideas in a way when that knowledge becomes a specialized knowledge that can't be just easily shared.
I feel like sometimes there's this idea of gatekeeping indigenous knowledge, and
Yes,
it doesn't serve us when that
yes,
happens in our community.
agreed. I totally agree with you. That is a worry and concern that I have. And I hope that we are able to, in community, hold space for these kinds of conversations. Because I think that people who might seem as if they're gatekeeping, I don't think that there's an intention there that's necessarily malicious or, unthoughtful. I think that it's, true that we live in a context where that's how it works, right? People have a specialized knowledge, you have access to it, and others don't. And that's sort of how it works in a capitalist society like this. But, I also hope that as we're trying to unmake those logics, that we're just open to being in conversation about dynamics we may unwittingly replicate. It's a constant work. It's all of us struggling all the time with values that always align with what the intention of our ancestors might have been.
When I was teaching some of my own workshops, someone, reached out to me and said, "Well, do you have a degree in this? What school did you go to?" And I said, "My Lolas taught me. I don't need a degree in this because my Lolas are, healers in their communities and they taught me."
Yeah, yeah, it's funny you say that, right? Especially because, I'm somebody who has this degree, but in the Western kind of educational system that I know, and sometimes I even forget because I don't myself try to put too much value on that. I do put value in the sense that I know how hard I worked to get this degree or kind of the degree, what that training meant and what that experience meant. And that's all important work. And the degree marks out that I committed this time, I did this work. I don't think I fully grasp like how other people ascribe value to the degree as if somehow it sets me apart or different or above. But I agree with you. I think that part of the work is, yeah, like that knowledge of our Lolas, that's valuable. And it's unique, meaning each of us, as the experiences we have cumulatively over our lives, every single one of us is so distinctive and unique. And those insights are valuable. And then when we find points of connection across ourselves, then we see that there is a kind of shared knowledge, right, that can be kind of discerned. But there's also something about the uniqueness of a person's life experiences that then they, that we can value on its own merit. And I'm totally with you on that 100%, that this idea that you have to have a certification or degree for a certain kind of practice is something that I'm hoping that we start to question more. If anything, the more interesting or more pertinent question might be, well, what was her life like? What were her experiences? How does that perhaps inform her practice of Hilot or whatever range of things that she did to advance healing that might be, uniquely suited for certain kinds of people versus others, right? Like I think about my Lola, and this might be true for many other people, as somebody who survived World War II as a woman, and who survived World War II, also always constantly under the threat of sexual violence, right? What it meant then to survive in that context of scarcity too, in the condition of war. So when really food supplies were limited or destroyed, access to medical supplies or just any kinds of medicines, even, plant medicines possibly inaccessible or destroyed. And so, what does it mean then to survive all that? There is, some level of knowledgeability around healing that has to have been activated by that generation to be able to live such that we are able to live our lives today, and I think that's all very valuable. And a degree and certification doesn't get you that.
You brought up your time as a professor and head of a department at UC Davis, teaching Asian American studies and ethnic studies. I want to talk about this transition from this institution of education to farming because it's so unique. How did that decision to transition away from UC Davis and launch Reimagination Farm, how was that even inspired? And what made you take on this new journey?
What prompted the journey was a couple of things. One, I was already feeling very, very disillusioned by the university. I actually had really aspired to work in an Asian American Studies department and teach Filipinx studies. In fact, my journey to becoming a professor began in an Asian American Studies course when I was an undergrad at UC Santa Barbara. It was my very, very first course ever in Asian American Studies. It was a course on Asian American women and feminism. I was like, wait, what? These are courses like this, And the professor who ended up becoming my mentor and collaborator, Dr. Diane Fujino, just blew me away. I had never seen an Asian American woman teaching these kinds of topics, and that was it. I was like, you know what? I am doing that. I want that. And so, when I eventually got the job at UC Davis after having worked in a sociology department in Rutgers University in New Jersey, it was like a dream come true. I'm like, I am home. I'm back close to the Bay. I get to teach students who are likely from the Bay. And, Asian Americans, Filipino folks, like this is the dream. I was so hopeful. And then I got the opportunity to become chair and I became full professor. So I'm like, let's go. We're going to, if everybody rejects us, all the institutions don't want to invest in Filipinx studies, then we'll just do a grassroots fundraiser. We're just about to make this happen on our own because I'm enough of a student of history as much as a professor of the Filipino historical experience to know that we can do it. We have so many examples in the Filipino community of what it means to just come together and, build it from on our own. That's how the Bulasan Center for Filipinx Studies was born. It was just a grassroots fundraising effort. So I was excited. It's like, yay, this is the dream job. I'm able to leverage this dream job to make this institution that we've never had in the UC system. And then it just literally came crumbling down almost immediately as I started to see the institution for what it is. Of course, it's not like I didn't always know that the institution wasn't built for us. But the truth is, I was also still hopeful that I could be part of the transformation. And I probably have been part of the transformation. And, there have been things that I participated in shifting. But, after all of that, I could also see how quickly the institution will shut it down in a myriad of ways. As soon as the Bulasan Center was created through the effort of the community, Just as soon as that happened, I could immediately feel the tentacles of the university trying to get their hands on our resources, trying to rein me in, because the kinds of things I was trying to do were not the sorts of things professors were supposed to be doing. There is a way that things are meant to be done in the university, and I was violating every single kind of approach to how it ought to be done. They did not like that. I could feel it. And so I was getting very, very, very disillusioned already being disillusioned to just around even Asian American studies and ethnic studies, right? It was this weird dynamic where you're seeing ethnic studies all of a sudden being passed by the state legislature. All of a sudden it's being mandated in schools and the K through 12 system. Yay, big win for the community, we thought. And yet ethnic studies departments were being constricted at the university level. Even though we were going to be celebrating at UC Davis 50 years of ethnic studies when we were one of the founding departments of Asian American studies in the country, the university wasn't putting any investment there. So all of this was kind of coming, I think, just to my consciousness, or just I became much more aware of these things when I became chair, when I started the Below Sun Center, and then the pandemic hit. And then I could see this institution is a business. It only cares about business as usual. Students are not people. The workers and the staff, faculty are not people. Staff and workers in particular. Faculty often, still could enjoy certain privileges and protections. But, just seeing just what an extractive institution the university is. And so already in the depths of the pandemic, I'm thinking, I do not know how I can continue to do this work. And I think, meanwhile, we're living the pandemic, right? We're seeing all of the possibilities that people are able to create in the context of some real fear. All of us so fearful about what was going to come, whether we had futures ahead of us, what that future would look like. But there was creativity and hope. And I think that was where the spark of potentially an alternative was planted in my brain. And really, in the depths of the pandemic, too, I experienced the worst loss I could ever have experienced in my life, the loss of my son, Amado. And it was really in that space, too, of grief and trauma, where that was the thing that just pushed me over, which was okay, we are in a new reality. And I am in a new reality. And I am either going to get at work in living in a new way, or I'm going to try to pretend that we can get back to normal should we see the end of this. And so in that moment, myself, my husband, together as a team, we decided we could not go back for the sake of, the people we lost, including Amado, although he wasn't the only one we lost, but also for the world. I think for us, we really felt like we could not return to normal if we were not seeing the pandemic as something symptomatic of something, very deeply wrong with the way we were living. Then we were only going to be part of the problem. And so that's what set us on a path before even Amado passed. For us, we approached a pandemic not with a big run to Costco for toilet paper and Spam, although, we did that too. But we really invested in growing. We stocked up on seeds. We stocked up on maps. We stocked up on other kinds of technologies that would allow us to navigate potentially a whole new world, because we were thinking that of potential apocalypse. I mean, we did all live through the apocalypse. And I think we have to remember apocalypse is still just around the corner. And I don't think we have to, approach that through fear. I think it's actually hope. The breakdown of these systems, like an apocalyptic breakdown of systems that have never served humanity or life on Earth. Yes to that. And let's prepare to start building the other world that we want. And so that's kind of how we decided, and for us, the invitation was we need to get back to the land. And even Amado, in the times we were able to talk to him prior to his passing, he was very hopeful. He's like, "Don't worry about me, mama. I'm living with indigenous folks. And yeah, like they just got hit by these typhoons and things are hard, but they have a knowledge where they will be able to survive this. Y'all, mama, I don't know about y'all. You better like find people, mom, and get some land and figure it out because you know that this system is unsustainable and indigenous people know this and that's why they fight so hard for their lifeways." And at the end of the day, Amado lost his life to the system, not to the fact that he was living in indigenous communities. We don't live in societies where indigenous knowledges are centered. So he was living in a context where a lot of the answers are, but are not the places where we turn to for the solutions for the future. And so I think that in a different context, Amado would be with us today if we lived in a world where indigenous peoples and their knowledges and lifeways were really valued and centered in the way they ought to be. But they're not. And so we lost him. But I think he left behind, though, in me, in my husband, this drive to do the work of world building. And so, that's what it became. And we just took this leap and here we are. It's really about, there's an invitation here for us to reframe, right? If we feel like there is a kind of end, let's not think of that as an end that we're fearing. I think we really need to get excited, actually, about the end of this system that has really robbed us of a full lives, in fact, and welcome the opportunity for the kind of creative unleashing that end will create. And we saw it in the pandemic. We were at our most creative in the pandemic, I think, as humanity. We were at our most we were loving, empathetic human beings in the pandemic in ways that we have quickly shifted out of that have made me really disappointed. I mean, I remember the ways people would interact, like, still kind of doing business as usual, sort of in modified ways, but just how tenderly we held one another, how freely we expressed our love and gratitude for each other, how freely we gave grace to people when they couldn't show up in the same kinds of ways. I miss that. And if that, an apocalyptic moment, is what opened up that, I'm okay with that. And I want to build that. Now, I don't think it's easy. And I think we've already, as a farm, really experienced some challenges around what does community building really look like when we don't have blueprints? How do we do it in ways that allow, for our individual family to thrive, even as we're extending to community, right? It's always this both and. The collective and the individual, because those are, we want to value both at the same time. And they have very different kinds of requirements, even as they have shared requirements. So yeah, I really invite us to just remember the best that came out of the pandemic, the best of this apocalyptic moment, the love that flowed freely, the generosity that flowed freely, the grace that flowed, the creativity. That is what I'm excited about. Let it burn down because this is all, it's an old reference now, but the Matrix, it is. It's just like this illusion. Like we gotta unplug from that because it is just an illusion. And, perhaps the illusion will last through our lifetimes, but for the descendants to come, this illusion is not going to be one that they live. So let's create the pathway to get them to the real living that we all deserve. And so I'm less afraid now and actually more excited, and that's sort of where the farm is, why we call it even Reimagination Farm. Let's reimagine things, folks. How would we differently live? How do we just create a different way of relating to one another, relating to the earth? And, it's been a beautiful experiment, a challenging one, but also, I feel like I wouldn't choose anything else.
So many things. Oh, yes. So we just interviewed Jelaine from Cambia & Co. She's from Toronto. She's a PhilCan, and she spoke about these things too, how even just as a business owner, she's challenging herself to build ecosystems and not empires. And I love this idea, this visual idea of ecosystems. And I told her, I said, there's so many people with this like-minded thinking that I feel like we just need to connect with each other.
I think there's definitely a lot of us who are like-minded. We are loosely connected, and there may be, I think we are approaching a time where it will become more important that we weave and braid all of the different ways that we are imagining and trying to practice different kinds of existences becomes important. And this is where I think my role as a scholar may well need to be activated again. Because so much of what a scholar does is engage in deep observation of processes, of phenomenon. I'm a sociologist by training. That is the work, is to observe and study society, social processes, analyze them, and kind of distill some key insights or lessons from those patterns that we see. And I think that that may be my role. If this degree was worth anything, it was not that it gave me some kind of status over and above and apart from our community, is that it gave me a certain set of skills that I can apply and that can produce certain kinds of knowledges for us. So I definitely feel like that's where I'm coming back to talk about full circles, right? If the turn away from the university was around this pandemic moment, kind of wanting to do a different kind of teaching, to also actually be in a space of learning, I'm feeling like now my scholarly kind of hat, because like teaching is one thing, to be a scholar is quite a slightly different thing to do, right? So I feel like I've been teaching in a new space as I've learned in a new space. And now I think in terms of being a scholar, taking the pause to analyze, to synthesize, and distill lessons. I'm feeling it in my gut that this is now the thing I need to start to turn some attention to, because I think that's a role I can play to help, if not convening all of us, to help braid and weave together all of the ways that we're imagining and doing a different kind of living, but to at least provide those insights.
Yes. And I know Reimagination Farm is not just a simple farm where you grow food and, tend to animals, but I personally know a lot of friends that have come to the farm for retreats, to take classes or workshops.
Yeah, absolutely. We've never envisioned that the farm would just be the place where we produce food for ourselves. It was definitely about producing food for the community, and not even about just producing food, but really tending to the land. So much of how we approach food production is with a vision of regenerating the soil as a kind of work that we do in the way that we can to give back directly to the land, the soil, for all the things it has given us. Because I think most of us don't think twice about how the soil, the land itself, has sustained us. And so I think for me, for my husband, Josh, how we farm is very much informed by a desire to be really a tender to the land and to regenerate the soil as an offering for everything that we've taken without much consideration. So yes, the learning and the healing piece of the Reimagination Farm is definitely a crucial part of what we do. Partly I am a teacher. That is how I've spent most of my life. It's probably that I'm such an enthusiastic learner that makes me actually a teacher. When I was a kid, I remember way before the internet, when there were things called, encyclopedias, physical encyclopedias. I remember going to the grocery store with my mom, and she was excited. Encyclopedias were like a thing too for Filipino families. Like you had invested in the knowledge of your family to have at your fingertips, these encyclopedias. And so I remember going to the grocery store and they were selling this set. They're called Funk and Wagnall's encyclopedias. I remember. And I was like, whoa, encyclopedias. And I don't know how old I must have been. Maybe like the age my child is now, third grade, fourth grade. I don't know. But I remember getting super excited. Like, oh, in this whole set, the knowledge of the world is contained, And I remember, I kid you not, like picking random letters and reading them because I wanted to know everything, And it's because I was such an enthusiastic learner that I ended up probably becoming an academic. And then in the process, because I so love what I learned, I like to share it. And that then, is why kind of student and teachers always, at least for me, kind of two sides of one coin, right? So I'm loving learning how to farm. I also want to be able to hold space for folks to learn with us. And then, in that moment, transform into teachers. So that's been a really crucial part of what we do. And absolutely kind of the community more broadly, but youth in particular are the people we care about. I think a lot of the youth, especially young folks who spent critical moments of their development, experiencing the pandemic. And it's interesting. I mean, the sociologist me is trying to process it all, but there's definitely a set of this younger generation that experienced the pandemic at a particular moment of their development, cognitively, emotionally, that has them longing for a connection to the land because there's a deep embodied sense that this system is not the system that's going to offer them any kind of life. They're very, very, very skeptical of the system. And I think it's hard, right? Because I think they're also being raised potentially by parents and elders that still have some hope for this system or snap back to normality. And they're not feeling satisfied with that. Those are the folks that are very drawn to the farm. And we are very much open arms trying to kind of hold space for them. So we have worked with different nonprofits and their youth programs to hold space with young people. I mean, we're only in season 2. But even from the onset, we were already trying to create internship programs and other kind of, opportunities for people to come. So we're still trying to figure those out, right? I think we're wide open. We've been trying to co-create with people, but we know that centering learning is important to us. And we've, kind of created different ways of facilitating that process. Even as we're trying to ourselves be in the space of learning, because farming is hard, it's very, very hard. So we can't be in a space of teaching until we've also done our learning ourselves. So there's that. But yeah, there's so many opportunities just in the last 2 years. We had internship programs. We didn't launch one again this year, but we may. Harvest is coming and we're really needing the support. And we know that there's a lot of learning that happens in the process of harvesting alongside people. We've had youth programs come with nonprofits, and that continues to expand. We also have hosted our own events. I mean, I just love the idea of holding space at the farm for, music and the arts, because I feel like that's just in addition to being on the land, where you have more plant life and animal life than people life, right? That there's something deeply healing about that. So we've been hosting space for events pretty regularly. And so we'll have an event coming up in September. But yeah, all of that is important to us, is to facilitate people's connection to land, to facilitate people's learning. But, we're also fast trying to learn ourselves and also creating systems, too, of engaging people. Because I think part of our worry is we don't want to also replicate an extractive relationship to land. I mean, I think that one of the things we've seen is everybody want to get to the land now, which is great. But I think that not everybody is prepared to give to the land. And that is a hard thing. To give to the land requires a kind of surrender to its needs, which, aren't predictable. That there's a kind of surrender to, the forces of nature, and recognizing that that's okay, that that's part of the work, is we have to learn to surrender to that. It's the work of trying to overpower nature and to control that has gotten us into this mess to begin with, right? So I think that that's a thing that people aren't always able to do. You can see it. I mean, we live in such sanitized existences, right? We don't even know how to live with non-human life. Whether it's the pollinators, we all know abstractly, oh, we need pollinators, they have to pollinate. But, we can't stand it when they're buzzing by our heads. We can't handle it when they're kind of hovering around us, We fear them. We want to eliminate them. There's like this impulse to kill them. There's a whole way, and that's just like bugs, but there's all sorts of things that the land requires, that life beyond human life, or even that human life requires, that I think that we as people still need to learn to do. And sometimes I worry that, there's the way that folks say they want to get to the land, but it becomes extractive. Like they're only okay insofar as, I'm just going to say it, what you can do on the gram, which is, okay. But I hope that people, don't limit their relation to the land as mere backdrop, but really allow themselves to surrender to it, to the other life forms that populate on it, that we depend on, that we recognize the need for our coexistence with them. And as much as, however much of a nuisance it may feel like, we just have to sit in that. And I think that's important. And I do worry because sometimes I feel like, folks are coming and it's exciting to frolic in the field and it's so cute, cottage core, yay.
But you got to get ready and be ready to get dirty and be with the land. You're right. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what's required of us, because my God, this land has given to us over and over again. And, sometimes I worry, because I see it a lot. Everybody's like, oh, the land heals, the land heals. You know what, y'all? Yes. And what is our responsibility to heal it back? Because we collectively have taken so much. So we need to put in the work. And I feel like sometimes that's not always the message that I think is being shared. And that for me is an extraction that we need to be mindful of, We can't just keep going to Mother Earth to heal us without some sense of responsibility that we're going to regenerate her too in the ways that we may have failed to in the past.
Honestly, I didn't even think about that. But it's, setting that intention. Not just this farm in this space is a healing space for me, but how are you healing back?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a hard ask. And I can see with people who come to visit, who come seeking healing, where they've had to leave because they've recognized that, they have to do a lot of their own internal work. And to just expect that somehow the land is just going to solve it all for you too, that's not going to happen either. It's a relationship. It's a give and take, which requires reciprocity. I've been thinking a lot about this. As a farm, we try to build community. It's not charity. And that's key because we can't also think about Mother Nature as this charity that just gives and gives and gives without expectation of you giving back. We have to think about being in community with the land and each other in a relationship. And that requires a kind of mutuality and responsibility and reciprocity. And I think that, that is something we're still trying to find ways to give words to, even for people we invite to space, that we invite them to understand that there is responsibility to be had. And you're not just coming here to heal and just take advantage of this natural setting, because then we're no different in a way from being kind of extractive, that we're participating in extractivism that maybe we don't intend, but we need to just pay attention to. And we have to name it, because sometimes I feel like if we don't name it, it's easy to just be like, oh, I'm going to hand to heal and let's give back as well.
I also want to ask, because you briefly mentioned it, but I know you have an upcoming fall, a Nihon harvest celebration on September 7th, and its significance is commemorating the 1965 grape strike led by Larry Itliong and all the Filipino agricultural workers at that time. Can you talk more about that event?
Yeah, no, it's interesting, right? Because Philippine American History Month, often when we think about it, we think particularly about figures like Manong Larry Itliong or Philip Veracruz, right? As these figures, right, who we want to commemorate for October. Of course, partly because October is Manong Larry's birthday month. But historically, it was the month of September that really was the significant month that then propelled Manong Larry into leadership role in the community, when the Filipino farm workers during harvest decided to go on strike. right? So there was a series of strikes that led to the kind of big Delano grape strike over, over a long stretch of time. Manong Larry had immediately been part of a strike action in the Coachella Valley. I think it was around August, because the harvest follows, things don't ripen at the same time, right? That's why Filipino farm workers migrated. It's because the harvest changes, right? So things get harvested further south earlier than whatever you may harvest here up north, right? So they had first been in Coachella Valley, had been harvesting grapes, had successfully struck and then earned a wage increase. Then they were moving their way up to Delano and, faced with, again, challenging circumstances during harvest, and then needing to really press and demand from the employers for an increase in wages, and also recognizing that we're not the only ones harvesting out here. There are other people from other backgrounds, not only Mexicans, which we know that, Filipinos and Mexicans at the head, kind of in the Delano grape strike, but also Yemeni farm workers and still others. So, I think for me, I think it's significant that we're celebrating our own harvest, but under very, very different terms, right? Celebrating harvest, not as this moment of hyper exploitation of Filipino workers, which it was, which it still is, but celebrating harvest in a space where relation to land and relation to capitalist agriculture are being actively challenged. And I'm really hoping that, that's where the event becomes this opportunity for us to really think about what it means to be in relation to land, not as exploited labor, or not even as kind of, just capitalist farmers. Because that's the other thing too, is, farming, even at the smaller scale, can still be very capitalist in orientation, right? Of course, farmers of all scales still need to earn a livelihood, but how do we, not participate in extractive, exploitative relations? That's still a challenge, regardless of the scale of your farm. But, I think that that's what we're trying to do with the Anihan Festival, is invite this reflection and a celebration of what it can look like when we're trying to push up against these other histories as Filipinos. So, I just love, there's something special about bringing music into and performance into rural space. It's just so magical, So we have sets of performers that we've invited, that we've been building in different ways with in the last few years. So we'll have Astrologic will be there. Astrologic had helped to hold space for a sound bath for us, to kind of inaugurate another collaboration connected to the farm that we have with Magpie Alchemy. So it's really special to be able to bring them back to celebrate harvest with us. We have Amihan and Malaya, girls who find their roots in the Excelsior and Soma, of course. And they just represent I think, some of the most creative energies of their generation. And I'm so pleased to also just be able to give them a chance to celebrate their birthdays, which is also November. We have San Tran. So San is a DJ who is now based in Sacramento. We also have Doble Bara. So they're also San Francisco based in the main. We have Magpie Alchemy will be also doing a workshop. Jamie and I have a long-standing collaboration. And she and I are actually going to be also doing an event talking about decolonial healing on September 5th, so just a couple days before her workshop on the farm. And then I'll be collaborating too with Roline Casper, who owns Roline's restaurant in Vacaville. When I was a professor, I wanted to make sure that UC Davis had not just, that had a diversity of contractors. When it came to like food vending on campus, I was like, I'm trying to order me some lechon, and UC Davis needs to recognize our people. So that's how we started a relationship. Like, I think she's still an official vendor, maybe the only Filipina food vendor that the university officially recognizes. So it's like a full day event, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. We wanted people to be able to have an opportunity, people who buy tickets to harvest. We're still going to need to harvest in between. and to build with one another, because our previous events were kind of like these, 3-hour kind of events where sometimes things felt so rushed, but we want people to be able to really be with one another, be on the land, to actually harvest, to check out our Sari Sari store, because we do have a Sari Sari store where we're working with different Filipinx makers for the most part right now, and have lots of little like artwork and books on consignment, in addition to, what you might find in a Sari Sari store in the Philippines, like packets of shampoo. Just kidding. It'll actually be, Jamie's skincare products through a Magpie Alchemy and snack items actually. But yeah, so I'm excited. Our events have been really lovely. People who've come out and made the trek, I have always walked away like just deeply moved. And I try to like make it exciting by just sharing. We've had multiple artists gift us with playlists that are inspired by their visits with the farm. So if people feel like, a 2 to 3 hour drive is hella long, at least we got some beautiful music folks can listen to on the way up. And I promise that once folks get there, it's like, it's magical. It is really magical. And we're so blessed that ancestors led us to that land. And they did. That's for probably a whole other show. But I can just tell you that Amado left us all these clues and led us right to that land. And we are just so blessed that he communicated so clearly and that we were open enough to see the messages and got ourselves there.
I love that. Oh,
we do have another event in November in collaboration with Sawaga River Press Books. They are having a launch of a book. I think it's Mungan or I'm not sure of the pronunciation of the name, but it's basically a children's book about a child's relationship with their Lola and kind of how they process the passing of their Lola. And, November is also for Filipinos, right? It's kind of All Souls Day. I think
Undas, yes.
Yeah, Undas. A lot of people around the world actually think of November as this moment when the spiritual veil is thin, where we connect to ancestors. It's also the month that Hmong people, my husband is Hmong, celebrate New Year also, when they connect with ancestors to thank them for harvest. So that's going to be a time kind of where we do our own ancestor altars, at the
I love it.
Yeah. So then that'll kind of end our events for 2024. But there's definitely lots of opportunities to connect. We're always open. Folks can follow our work on Instagram, of course, Reimagination Farm, or me specifically at Mad Professora on Instagram, our websites and all of that. But I try to get folks to help us maintain it because I'm the worst. And part of it too, like the land is demanding. I have to like be there. And our internet, frankly, is sometimes inconsistent. So I try to do an IG live from the field, but it's not going to happen. So I can't post, but maybe that's the point,
Yes.
is just be present. So,
yes.
So sometimes folks are like, don't know what is happening with us, but we try. So that, volunteers, anyone want to do social media with us, come out, take photos and process later. We can use that help because we haven't really been able to document actually even all the steps of our process. Again, it demands a kind of attention and presence of mind. But we know that people also want to learn alongside us virtually. So, if they can't make it out to an event to learn with us directly, there's a desire still to connect on, social media, which we recognize the importance of. It's just hard
season 3
to do from where we're
Stay
at.
Stay tuned. I got you, Dr. Robyn.
Netflix don't have.
We're working on that reality show.
I know. It will be cute. Z will be the star.
Really you spoke on so much. I just want to give a quick shout out to Astrologic because they're a current creative growth artist, part of Panay Voltron. They also have performed at every ancestor altars that we've ever held since the inception of ancestor altars in 2022. So they're definitely a healing. Yeah. They're just a whole healing vibe and presence. With their music, with their skills, with their art form. And Charito, she said it best where she said, my art is the way I live. How I live my life is my art.
I love that. Yeah, no, they have been amazing. And, I there is something about music and kind of, those vibrations, literally, right, that can be deeply human. Those frequencies. So, and I think that might partly, explain why we've had such a beautiful bounty. But I think it's, a combination of calling in ancestors, expressing that gratitude, being grateful, surrendering ourselves to the land, being present to the land and all the living things that it sustains. And yeah, inviting artists who are tapping into frequencies and vibrations that allow us to dream and to allow us to begin to stretch our imaginations in ways that we need to stretch. I think all of that, I think, explains what has accounted for an incredibly bountiful harvest. I mean, we're already starting to harvest. We just had a little quick last minute planned pop up in South San Francisco last week, which went really well. And we can see everything coming out. It's been beautiful. And I think all of the work we've been doing is producing that yield. And so we're trying to learn those lessons too, so that we can continue to practice that relationship because it's felt fruitful for both for the land and for ourselves.
Well, I have one last question for you, Dr. Robyn, before we part today. But the last question that I ask all my guests is, what are you currently geeking over? And it can be anything.
Oh yeah. I'm totally geeking over. I don't know. It's all geek fest at the farm because I don't know any of it and I'm still learning all of it. I'm really kind of geeking over just trellising systems, like how to do it and how to really work with viney plants. It's a relationship, right? So you have plants that are vines and they reach and they stretch, and it's really cool when you watch them because they have these little tendrils that like attach. And that happens naturally and it'll kind of crawl on the ground. And yet when we cultivate this relationship with this plant, right, to both foster its growth, not just, for us, but also for it, like the trellis can become this thing that you introduce into that relationship to help that plant grow, and not just grow, for its lifetime, but also grow for the generations to come, because you're able to, harvest seeds from mature, kind of fruit. So anyway, it's all kind of really interesting. And I could think about it like pruning and all of that, right? I feel like there's a lot of metaphor there for just even people, right? How it becomes important to, create structures and boundaries that they can actually be helpful for growth, or that pruning, cutting away can open up space for growth. So it's not about a cutting that leads to a demise, but actually more, opportunity for spaciousness. So there's all sorts of stuff. And I mean, maybe the metaphoric, like whatever, that framework is not always, useful, but I think it is. I think there's so much. Everybody talks about the land as teacher, kind of, plants as teachers. So I definitely am learning a lot. So I'm geeking out about it because I'm like, wow. So if you clip here and you clip there, and then it can open up space there, and so yeah, that's been fun.
Thank you so much. I was just thinking that too as you were speaking about it. I was like, this is a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah. That's why I need to write. I think that's what I feel called to do. Like the scholar stuff in me is like, you got to start writing again. And, you're liberated from a place where you have to write in a different voice. Now you can write in your own. So I'm trying to slowly edge my way back into writing because I kind of developed a weird allergy to it. It's probably why I also don't post. It's like writing became too connected to academia and that work. And it's like I needed to be free of that. So now I feel like I'm in a place of distance enough where I can see writing as a tool that I don't have to use for this institution, that I can, appreciate for something else. So hopefully I can open up some more spaciousness for writing this winter.
I love that. I'm the same way. It's going to be a reflection of our evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Robyn. We so appreciate you and your time, your energy, and every way that you are healing not only the community, not only the folks that you surround yourself with, but also the land and the intentional way you're healing in that way. So thank you so much, Dr. Robyn. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much for holding this space and for space for these kinds of conversations to be held in our community and not just here, but kind of beyond. It's such a valuable work that you're doing here. So thank you as well.
I think the biggest takeaway from our conversation was that this entire conversation just encapsulated the essence of decolonization. Letting go of old, broken systems and imagining something entirely new that isn't rooted in harmful, capitalistic ways we've been conditioned to accept. Dr. Robyn talks about embracing the end of these systems, not with fear, but with excitement, as a chance to tap into our creativity and love, much like what we saw during the pandemic. That time showed us how capable we are living with more empathy, kindness, and generosity, revealing a glimpse of what life could be if we unplug from this illusion, much like in The Matrix. Our current structures feel real, but really they're just a facade. And breaking free from them opens up a world of possibilities for a more authentic way of living. When it comes to building something new, like at Reimagination Farm, it's not easy, but it's necessary. It's about figuring out how to create communities and support people in a way that balances individual needs with the collective good. It's a challenge, but also a beautiful experiment in rethinking how we relate to each other and to the earth. The farm is a small example of what's possible, a place where love, creativity, and connection we saw during a crisis can become the everyday norm. I think this conversation reminded me so much of the same way I chose to move away from New York during the pandemic, extracting myself from the hustle of Hollywood, a system that so often takes art and makes it hyper-capitalistic, where art becomes a commodity, where quantity comes before quality, where inequality is the norm, and where people are easily replaceable. I once overheard a well-known director compare actors with cattle. Letting go of a dream I chased for so long gave me the room and space to dream bigger. I'll admit, it wasn't easy, and I definitely grieved for a couple of months, but I realized I don't want to just struggle for a seat at their table, which is rooted in capitalism, sexism, racism, but instead, I started to dream of creating our own table, rooted in joy, empowerment, and community, or as we like to say here, kapwa. Like Dr. Robyn, I chose to follow my intuition, maybe even listen to our ancestors. And letting go of what I once thought was my life's calling, I returned to California, started a family, and took this job with Belay Creative to launch this podcast, creating a platform for Filipino Americans to share their stories, their truths, and legacies. And this idea of building a table can seem overwhelming at times. But once I focused on just one step at a time, or as Dr. Robyn would say, one seed at a time, I was amazed by the harvest that follows. We have listeners from all over the world, thousands of listeners that listen to us weekly. And so I began planting these seeds, knowing that I may never see this table fully built in my own lifetime, but with the hope that my son and others like him will one day sit at this table empowered, uplifted, and thriving. Cultural Cultivators is hosted by me, Nicole Salver. You can follow me at Kindred Kapwa or follow us at cultural.cultivators. Kultivators with a K on Instagram. The podcast is co-produced by John Reyes, Kindred Capois, and Balai Creative, and it is a product of Cultivate Labs. Stay in touch at balaicreative.org.